Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this policy exchange event on reforming the criminal justice system. It's a huge pleasure to host this event today here and to have Nick Herbert speak for a number of reasons. Firstly, I think criminal justice reform is probably one of the areas where the coalition is seen as being most radical, be it police accountability, be it prison reform, be it the attempt to join up a very fragmented system. There's a lot going on. Also a big priority for us here at Policy Exchange. We've just published, I hope some of you will have seen, on the issue of drugs in prison. We're just about to publish some work on reoffending, and we've just appointed a brilliant new head of criminal justice, who's probably known some of you, Blair Gibbs, who's going to be joining the excellent Max Chambers, and it's an area where our work is growing pretty quickly. And thirdly, it's great to have this event here today, partly because I think that Nick, just as a person, is recognised as being one of the most interesting and dynamic people in this new government, and in the interesting position of having two jobs. You know, John Prescott had two JAGs, Nick has two jobs, a very interesting role in both reforming the police and also trying to join up all the bits of our criminal justice system. Now, I am told by my researchers that there is apparently some kind of sporting event on today. I'm not sure what that is. And I'm sure you will all be keen to do that. Please do take off your ties, take off your jackets, strip off as much as you would like to strip off, because it is very hot in here. We've had Nick here to speak before as a shadow minister. It's a huge pleasure now to be able to welcome him as a minister. Thank you so much for coming, Nick.
Thank you, Neil. The pleasure really is mine. And first of all, I'd like to thank Policy Exchange very much for inviting me to speak today. And I'd also like to pay tribute to your work. The role of think tanks in formulating bold policy to reshape government has probably never been more important. And Policy Exchange has already made an immense contribution in formulating ideas to reform policing and criminal justice policy, and I'm sure that it will continue to do so. I'm about to deliver quite a long speech. I'm sorry about that. I won't take offense if any of you make a rapid exit afterwards because you want to go and watch the football. I'll be following you quite quickly, but I would also be delighted to take questions for anyone that would like to ask them. I've had an interesting morning. I've been looking at an offender management project down in the docks, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And next door, the X Factor was being filmed, and of course, like a typical politician, I was drawn to it like a magnet. I was unable to insinuate myself into the production. 3 years ago, I wrote Policing for the People, the Conservative Party's radical agenda to bring accountability to police forces. I followed this with Prisons with a Purpose, with no less radical proposals to recast the penal system and reduce reoffending. Now I find myself charged by the Prime Minister to support Theresa May at the Home Office and Ken Clarke at the Ministry of Justice in driving these plans forward, reforming criminal justice policy and attempting to ensure a coherent approach between what is now two departments. I'm not sure whether I'm a poacher turned gamekeeper or a reform recidivist. Today, I want to set out the coalition government's approach to law and order and explain the principles that will guide us as we embark on an ambitious programme of criminal justice reform. Our mission is to create a fairer, more efficient and more accountable criminal justice system, one which people trust. And I want to begin by restating a truth: that law and order is fundamental to a civilised, free and democratic society. Public safety is the first responsibility of any effective government. The public services which keep people safe are more important than almost any other. Public concern about crime is remarkably consistent. The issue remains in the top three concerns, up there with immigration and the economy. Everybody rightly expects to be able to live safely in their homes, to protect the possessions which they've worked hard to acquire, and to walk the streets without fear of harm or harassment. These are the most basic conditions of a free and civilised society. Ensuring these conditions, particularly in urban areas, is not easy. It can't be taken for granted. It can't be achieved by gimmicks or short-termism. It requires effective planning, hard work, and strong and honest leadership. But leadership that respects the professionalism and expertise of those who work in the system and supports, not stifles, the passion and drive of the public who want to make their own area safer. I want to get past the stale debate about crime figures. We desperately need measures of crime and a process of publishing the information in which the public can have confidence, which we can all agree about, and which give us a clear and meaningful picture of what's happening. One measure of crime recorded by the police has changed, so it can't show reliable trends in violent crime, something the public are rightly worried about. The other measure, the British Crime Survey, hasn't counted all victims. Last week's experimental BCS figures revealed that anywhere between several 100,000 and 2 million crimes are taking place against children, crimes that hadn't been measured before. It's hardly surprising then that the public simply don't believe the figures. So in due course, we'll announce our plans for how crime should be measured in future. Trusted data will be particularly important if we're increasingly judging success by outcomes, by how much crime there is, how confident people feel. And we mustn't lose sight of the big picture. Because while crime has fallen internationally, and there have particularly been reductions in acquisitive crime, aided by better technology to protect cars and homes, we continue to have one of the highest victimisation rates in the EU, with a higher likelihood of assault. Choose your measure, and there are between 5 and 11 million crimes a year. Either way, this is extremely high, higher than our peer group countries. Antisocial behaviour blights communities, drugs are too prevalent, and violent youth crime, often unreported, remains a serious concern. Perhaps most shocking of all, according to the British Crime Survey, 80% of the public believe that the criminal justice system respects the rights of those accused, while by contrast, just over a third believe it meets the needs of victims. Less than half of the public, less than half, have confidence in the effectiveness of the criminal justice system. So in the debate about statistics, don't let's belittle the challenge or dismiss the public's concern. Crime can never be too low, our streets can never be too safe, and there can never be excuses for inaction. We won't start to make the right changes or go far enough in our reform programme unless we accept what's gone wrong. The problem hasn't been a lack of government money. Combined annual budgets of the police, courts and prison have increased dramatically over the last decade by £8 billion, from £11 billion to £19 billion a year. That's an increase of 38% in real terms. Nor has there been a lack of laws. The last 13 years have been characterised by an unprecedented hailstorm of legislation, over 60 criminal justice acts, and more than 3,500 new criminal offences. Often, new legislation included measures to repeal certain aspects of previous legislation that had never been implemented because they'd already proved to be unworkable. The problems were fundamental. An ever tighter central grip had at best only limited success in driving up standards in the components of the criminal justice system, but it also eroded local autonomy and discretion. Police forces, prison and probation services became almost overwhelmed with targets imposed from Whitehall and process measures that have sapped morale and caused widespread resentment. It also drove a fractured system, each agency looking to central government for direction rather than looking to the victims, witnesses, offenders and wider public, and then working across the system to solve their problems. Tough rhetoric on crime led to ill-thought measures, government by gimmick, and an ineffective authoritarianism which threatened civil liberties but did little to build public confidence. Grandstanding by previous ministers on sentencing was followed by emergency measures, such as the end of custody licence scheme, which saw 80,000 prisoners released early until the scheme was scrapped just weeks before the general election. There were some important innovations over the last decade. the family intervention projects, victim personal statements, and the introduction of PCSOs, for instance. But these examples are the exceptions that prove the rule. A lack of a coherent approach to the criminal justice system as a whole. Whatever the other merits of splitting the Home Office, the result was a dislocation of criminal justice policy. We know on the ground that effective joint working between agencies is essential to tackle crime, but there's been little of it at the national level. What we're left with is a system that is fractured where it should be seamless, and reactive where it should be preventative. The way in which it does business and engages with the public is similarly disjointed. It's remote, lacking transparency where it should be open and honest, and it's too focused on offenders where it should be accountable to the public and driven by the needs of victims. Critically, professionals in the system are limited by interference from the centre where they should be empowered and set free. A government website describes the criminal justice system as one of the major public services in the country. But more than half of all crime in this country is committed by people who have been through this service. And too often, it's not a system at all. The police, courts, prisons, and probation services are all links in the chain of justice. Building a safer society means ensuring that each link in the chain of justice is strong, yet every link is broken. Early intervention, we know, is vital to prevent young people slipping into crime, yet 60% of those given sentences of up to 4 years didn't attend school regularly. The public want action on antisocial behaviour and a visible police presence on the streets. Yet despite record officer numbers and the neighbourhood policing programme, we still have too many police officers who are invisible, tied up with paperwork when the public want to see them out on the beat. There are weak incentives across the system to prevent the slide of offenders into custody. Indeed, if anything, such incentives actually promote greater use of custody. There's little use of informal sanctions for children and weak non-custodial punishments for juveniles. There's a failure to enforce fine collection and communities disposals, including drugs interventions, which are not completed. In fact, nearly half of those sentenced to a community or suspended sentence order will never complete it. Prisons are overcrowded and drugs use is a serious problem. 40% of sentenced offenders have mental health issues. Offenders are being locked in their cells for most of the day and do little purposeful activity. Few short sentence prisoners receive supervision or support on release, and half of all adult offenders re-offend within a year. The attempt to create a national offender management service with decentralised decision-making and contestability succeeded in name only. The idea of integrated or end-to-end offender management is only getting off the ground across part of the country. Elsewhere, it's little more than an ambition. And so the cycle of crime is perpetuated. A hardcore of repeat offenders commit the vast majority of all offences. Half of all crime is being committed by people who have previously been convicted, people who the system has already dealt with. And a Home Office study of 10 to 25-year-olds found that 7% of their sample committed over 80% of the offences. We can't go on like this, spending ever more, yet still lurching from one law and order crisis to another. The dislocated approach to preventing crime and reoffending has divided professionals who should have common cause, and it carries immense social and financial costs. It's costing up to £70 billion in personal crime, household crime, fraud and commercial crime alone a year. Once you take into account the social costs of antisocial behaviour, drug dealing and fear of crime, the costs are even higher. We have to break the old cycle of crime, and that means breaking out of the old politics. The Prime Minister has stated clearly the principles that underpin the Coalition's programme for government: freedom, fairness and responsibility. Those principles should run through our approach to law and order and criminal justice reform. Freedom is a vital precondition of a safe society. We will be clear-sighted about the importance of civil liberties, understanding that our security is founded on them. We cannot rely on more laws to make us more law-abiding. That is why we will introduce a freedom bill to restore freedoms and civil liberties, rolling back the state by reducing impositions on individual citizens and restoring freedoms such as the right to non-violent protest. And that is why we have already introduced a bill to scrap ID cards. But it isn't just individual freedom from an overpowerful state that has been under threat, but the social freedom that comes from living in a safe community. A society that is safer for ordinary citizens is one where they have freedom from crime and the fear of crime. When crime and antisocial behaviour go unchallenged, whole neighbourhoods can become no-go areas where innocent residents lose ownership and feel unable to live the life they choose. Reducing crime and rebuilding confidence is as much about restoring people's freedom as it is about providing security. Crime is also a social justice issue. We can all be victims, but those of us who are better off live in safer areas, while the poorest in society suffer by far the worst crime. And social problems of absent parents, childhood abuse, drug and alcohol addiction, mental illness and poor education all blight the lives of too many young offenders. A fairer society requires effective crime reduction. Reducing crime through better policing, punishment and rehabilitation, and through working with partners outside the criminal justice system entirely ensures that everyone, including the poorest in our society, can live in safety and security. Ensuring we have early and targeted crime prevention for those most at risk also ensures that those who are in danger of turning to crime can be steered towards a different path and choose to live a better life. So our determination to tackle crime and reform the criminal justice system is rooted in a progressive ideal. Individual and social responsibility is the third and in many ways the most important principle that we will apply to the criminal justice reform. An effective criminal justice system should be based on a fair apportioning of personal responsibility. Offenders need to know that their actions have consequences. Without proper boundaries, there is an all too familiar escalation from childhood misdemeanors to juvenile antisocial behaviour to adult criminality. Children at risk of offending are not made to face the consequences of their actions. As a result, they can grow up without ever learning to respect the law, authority and the community in which they live. We need to become comfortable again with the notion of punishment as a consequence of antisocial behaviour, and the criminal justice system must reinforce responsibility and ensure that offending always has consequences which are visible to the law-abiding majority. We need to insist that offenders accept their responsibilities by paying back to society and victims, by making reparation, including participating in restorative justice where appropriate, by working in community payback and completing the task, and by earning their release from prison rather than expecting early release. But individual responsibility is only one side of the coin. Social responsibility is the other, and it's also vital to safer communities. We need to ensure that parents take responsibility for their children's behaviour. We need to ensure that schools have the responsibility and power to enforce discipline. The integrated offender management approach in Bristol aims for a collective responsibility for a safer city. Police, probation, local businesses and offenders themselves taking responsibility for their actions. Our review of the licensing laws will ensure that businesses accept their responsibilities to prevent binge drinking. The Coalition's programme for government speaks of a big society matched by big citizens. Part of that means fostering a resurgence in community activism to galvanise action by local groups, encouraging communities to share responsibility for making their neighbourhoods safer. This is not about the state shirking its responsibilities, but precisely the opposite. The state firmly supporting people to do the right thing. In the 1950s, there were 67,000 special constables, nearly 5 times the number today. There are already 3.5 million people involved with Neighbourhood Watch, we have not begun to fulfil the potential of social action to help tackle crime. Conventional methods of combating crime, policing and punishment, will always be necessary, and they're vital tools to keep communities safe. But on their own, they are not enough. Our ambition must be to repair every one of those links in the chain of justice and end the revolving door of reoffending. We want to begin with stronger families and more focused early intervention. We want to see local authorities, registered social landlords, social services and health services coordinate more effectively to address problem behaviour. We want to see good quality neighbourhood policing, policing that is visible and available, focusing not just on detection and response, but also on preventing crime. We want to see sentencing reflecting the importance of work and rehabilitation, as well as punishment and reparation to victims. We want to see fines and penalties enforced. We want to see community sentences which are robust and effective, with a focus on reducing reoffending, where offenders are got off drugs, where they complete requirements to work, and where failure to comply is simply not tolerated. We want to see prisons with a purpose, free of drugs, where offenders work and the system focuses on preparing them for release and ensuring that they do not offend again. And we want to be sure that the public is protected from dangerous offenders and that supervision arrangements when they are released are as rigorous as possible. It's a mark of how disconnected the criminal justice system has become from the public that these goals may be seen as over-ambitious. To most people, they are simply common sense prescriptions. But of course, our ambition to reform must be married with the reality of the fiscal position and the inevitable constraints on the public finances. Yesterday's budget made clear the scale of the challenge facing the public sector. A reduction in spending of £17 billion by 2014-15. This is essential to reducing the deficit, and the criminal justice system as a whole must play its part. Although we will not know precisely what that means until after the comprehensive spending review has been concluded, we can't sustain a situation where, without action, we would, in 5 years' time, be spending over 3 times more on debt interest alone than on the entire criminal justice system. Achieving savings will mean driving value for money and delivering more from less. The criminal justice system is no more immune from these imperatives than any other public service. We've already announced the need for greater efficiencies in police forces. Today, Ken Clarke has announced proposals to modernise and make more effective use of the court estate. This includes consulting on the closure of 103 magistrates' courts. Of these courts, half sit for less than half of the time available to them, wasting large amounts of money, both for the court service and for others in the criminal justice system who need to have a presence at a number of different courts. But more than this, we need to take the opportunity to think again about how we can provide more modern court services. The arrangements we currently have are historical, and they now need to be reassessed to ask if they meet the needs of society as it is today. We increasingly use the internet and email to communicate and access services. Providing access to justice does not necessarily mean providing a courthouse in every town or city. We'll shortly be announcing proposals to reform legal aid, on which we spend over £2 billion a year, more than almost any other country. But we will not forget the most needy in society, and we will ensure that legal aid continues to provide fair and necessary access to justice for those who need it. Criminal justice reform holds as much promise of delivering social benefits as it does economic ones. We need to be clear that it's outcomes that matter, not inputs. This is hardly a novel idea. The founder of modern policing, Sir Robert Peel, stated in his 9th principle of policing that the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with it. That was in 1822. But too often we've assumed that success equates to size. The test of an effective police force is not how much it costs or the number of police officers it employs. The test of effective courts, an effective court system, is not the number of court buildings. The test of an effective penal system is not the number of offenders in prison. The test of ensuring access to justice is not the same as the size of the legal aid budget. And the test of an effective criminal justice system is not how much money we're spending on it. It already costs approaching £20 billion a year, making it one of the most expensive criminal justice systems in the world. We spend more of our GDP on criminal justice than France or Ireland or Italy, incarcerating more offenders but denying them effective rehabilitation. Letting them out early, only to lock them up again 6 months later, is not effective policy, but it's expensive policy. Sentencing thousands of offenders to undertake probation supervision, which isn't visible or tough, is not effective policy. And if offenders simply come back through the door, it's expensive policy too. The old numbers game is a fraud on the public. We need an honest reappraisal of what counts as success in law and order policy. We need new thinking about how to deliver better outcomes, thinking which doesn't start from the assumption that more cash is the only answer, or that old, underutilised buildings are indispensable to criminal justice. There are more ways other than old-fashioned, under-visited police stations, for instance, for the police to have a footprint or base in their communities, sharing community premises, or a shop front on the local parade. There should be ways other than sitting in traditional courts to involve magistrates in the delivery of swift summary justice. We can also use our valuable resources more wisely. Specialist domestic violence courts in places like Sunderland and Leicester have strengthened the links between local partners, working together with common purpose. And we need better ways to spend the money we have. Because the truth is that even if resources were flowing freely into and out of the Treasury, and they're not, reinforcing failing systems with more cash won't produce the results. Reform of the criminal justice system isn't an optional extra. The last decade has shown us that without reform, the agencies won't deliver. So over the course of the next few months, we will be setting out proposals for fundamental criminal justice reform. We will introduce a police reform and social responsibility bill in this first session of the new Parliament. Later this year, we will set out proposals to reform sentencing and the way we manage offenders. Today, I want to identify the principles, the threads of reform, which will run through our approach. First, we must move away from Labour's centralised direction and targets, and focus on securing outcomes rather than dictating processes. We must stop telling criminal justice professionals how to do their job and start holding them firmly to account for the results they deliver. The huge gain will be a reduction in bureaucracy, greater discretion, and more local innovation. We must trust professionals, but that can't mean giving up on the drive for higher standards. Stronger accountability is the quid pro quo for abandoning the decade of deliverology. Where appropriate, we should replace bureaucratic accountability with democratic accountability. So we'll drive on with our policy of introducing directly elected individuals to replace police authorities. We're discussing these plans carefully and constructively with the police and other stakeholders, and further details will be announced in due course. But let me make one thing clear. We will protect the operational independence of the police, just as we must defend the independence of the judiciary. This reform will build a strong new bridge between the police and the public. It will produce a clarity and accountability for police performance, such as we have seen evolving in London. It will ensure policing for the people. We also need to focus on the importance of accountability in other elements of the criminal justice system. The absence of clear lines of accountability for preventing the slide of offenders into the penal system and for reducing reoffending once they're in it is a key underlying problem which our reforms must address. It's also a problem in the range of local partnerships working in this area, such as community safety partnerships. These can be successful in joining local agencies' efforts to tackle crime, but they can also be bureaucratic. I want them to be free to determine the best working arrangements for the places they serve. Local cooperation is vital, but these partnerships need to be action-oriented, not meetings-oriented, with stronger and clear accountability to local communities. They need to drive cooperation between frontline professionals at the neighbourhood level. This is where communities engage with their services, what the Prime Minister has called the key building block of the big society. There must be no more transfer of blame. Local agencies are in the crime-fighting business together, and they have a responsibility to work together. As we move away from ring-fenced central programs towards streamlined funding and greater autonomy for local agencies to determine priorities, they must answer for outcomes and how the money is spent. There are already good examples of this kind of working. This morning, as I mentioned, I was in East London to see the Diamond District project in action. It's an area pioneering an integrated offender management approach, focused on the offenders who do the most damage locally. By making contact with offenders before they've even left jail, by pulling together all local schemes, and by managing offenders to make sure they're carrying out their community sentences, they're mending the links in the chain locally and driving down recidivism. Police, probation, and local authorities working together. When the agencies come together effectively on the ground, they can deliver real results. Second, we must get the incentives right in the criminal justice system. Targets are poor incentives and often drive perverse behaviour and outcomes. We should embrace far more powerful incentives, opening up contestability in penal services and paying providers from the private and the not-for-profit sector by results. Our coalition agreement commits us to introduce a rehabilitation revolution that will pay independent providers to reduce reoffending, paid for by the savings this new approach will generate within the criminal justice system. The Peterborough Social Impact Bond prototype provides the means to pilot a payment by results framework. We will pay investors, working with experienced social sector organisations such as the St Giles Trust and YMCA, for their success in reducing reconvictions in adult short-term sentence prisoners discharged from jail. This will involve a long-term package of purposeful interventions, both inside Peterborough Prison and after release, to help offenders resettle successfully into the community. We should be really excited by the potential for unlocking the expertise of organisations, especially in the voluntary sector, which know how to work with offenders to get them back on the straight and narrow, whether through rigorous interventions to get them off drugs, mentoring, or preparing them for the world of work and responsibility. For too long, we have done next to nothing to supervise or support offenders on short-term prison sentences who on release rapidly return to a life of crime. Now we have the opportunity, through rigorous payment by results mechanisms, to capture the savings to the criminal justice system by preventing reoffending, make effective rehabilitation services a reality, and cut crime. You could call this justice reinvestment. Third, with greater accountability comes the prize of greater autonomy for professionals in the criminal justice system. We've already announced that we want to return charging decisions in minor cases to police officers. The next few years and dealing with the deficit will present challenges for those who work in public services. But the increased responsibility, the space, discretion and trust, the reduction in direction, bureaucracy and paperwork will be a hugely positive step for people who work in the criminal justice system. Fourth, we will drive value for money, focusing on the opportunity of greater back office collaboration, centralised procurement, and use of technology to improve the performance of the criminal justice system. We need to ensure that IT systems are compatible, promote innovative ways of working that can drive efficiencies, such as handheld terminals for the police to record searches, and evaluating the capacity of video link technology to save time and money. Local teams and services also have a key role to play here, maximising the effective use of staff time and the way in which agencies work together. This means reducing the unnecessary paperwork, the wasted time, and the inefficient processes to improve value for money. The government will play its part by ending central direction and targetry. But in turn, we need a cultural change throughout the criminal justice system, where every player is focused on performance rather than process, on cost-effective action rather than resource-sapping bureaucracy. Fifth, in place of the torrent of new and frequently ill-considered laws and initiatives, we want to take an evidence-led approach, spreading information about what works in the system and ensuring that those who work in it are equipped to do the job. We're reviewing the toolkit for antisocial behaviour and will ensure that agencies have effective measures to tackle it, including forms of restorative justice, such as neighbourhood justice panels. I want to talk to the professionals in the criminal justice system, to listen and understand their point of view, to consult properly before we move, unlike the way in which the previous government operated. Six, if the public are to be able to hold the criminal justice system to account, they need better information. Unlike councils, schools, or hospitals, more people feel uninformed than informed about the police. We must open up the criminal justice system so that the public, and especially victims of crime, know more. People have the right to know when there's been a spate of burglaries in their street, so that they can come together with their neighbours, local services and community organisations to collectively address the issue. People have the right to know what action has been taken on crimes they've heard about, how justice has been done, and they have the right to have their questions answered if it hasn't. So from January, we'll be providing crime data at a level that allows every community in the country to see what is really happening on their streets. We'll require police forces to hold regular beat meetings so that residents can hold them to account. And in contrast, with the delays and failures of the last government, I am determined to look for a cost-effective way of driving forward a national non-emergency number to give the public even better access to the police and other local public services. These are significant steps forward in the transfer of power from Whitehall, and we can go further in relation to information. Transparency should extend to how money is spent, so that we know across the criminal justice system what each service costs, how much senior figures are earning, and the value of external contracts. Seventh, we need to encourage greater community involvement in keeping neighbourhoods safe. Of course, some communities are more able to get involved than others, and some individuals have more time to commit than others. But others simply can't find a way to interact with the system. 60% of us in this country say we wouldn't get involved in an antisocial incident. In Germany, the same number say they would get involved. That's partly because we've been sending mixed messages to the public that have left them worrying about their basic right to defend themselves and their home. I think we need more neighbourliness, with people feeling able in their communities to stand up for the social values that underpin our society. And I think the system should back people who do the right thing. We need to support civic action, not freeze it out. So we can make sure that local services, for example, neighbourhood policing teams, have a clear role in enabling and encouraging communities to come together and get involved. We can devolve funding, power and decision-making to local groups and engage the voluntary sector to run innovative services that provide value for money. As Sir Robert Peel famously said, the police are the public and the public are the police. We want to build on Neighbourhood Watch and community crime fighters, linking the schemes together, making them more accessible and attractive to a wider group of people, and encouraging members to get their neighbourhoods involved. Whether it's through looking out for our neighbours, reporting crimes or antisocial behaviour, and knowing that action will be taken, challenging for better services at beat meetings or online, supporting victims or devoting more time to volunteering, building the big society is as important to fighting crime as running effective agencies. The criminal justice system cannot be isolated from community engagement, and it will be immeasurably strengthened by it. The criminal justice system is fundamental to our being able to live together peacefully. It cannot fall below the highest standards set by any of our other public services. It exists to ensure that people are honest and considerate, so it too must be honest and considerate. Sadly, for too many people, too much of the time, the criminal justice system has let them down. And by denying the problems, dismissing public fear of crime, or pretending the government has quick and easy solutions, politicians have let the public down on crime too. The coalition government understands the need for a new start. We understand that crime matters and that people care deeply about it. It destroys individual lives and whole communities. For some people, crime has literally made life not worth living. This government is determined to put law and order where it belongs in the national agenda, right at the top. We must ensure that people can once again have faith that crime is being tackled, offenders are being punished and reformed, and that Britain is becoming a safer place in which to live. So our objective must be nothing less than the complete restoration of trust in the criminal justice system. This does not mean getting rid of everyone in charge and putting in a completely new team. The fault for the present state of affairs is not that of the dedicated professionals who staff our police forces, our prisons, and other parts of the system. The fault belongs to the system in which they have had to operate. We can't change everything overnight, and we can't do it by tinkering or spending yet more public money. Instead, we have to embark on a determined and radical programme of criminal justice reform. We should aim for the public to have the same level of confidence in our criminal justice system and respect for all those who work in it as they do the NHS. And like the NHS, perhaps it's time to tell the public directly that this is not a criminal justice system, opaque, unaccountable and distant, but a criminal justice service which exists to protect and serve them just as much as it exists to serve the interests of justice. This can't go on being a system where half of the police, the first representatives of the system most people will encounter, say they'd speak critically of it. I want this to be a service in which communities and professionals alike take pride, where we are united with common cause and shared values. And I want it to be a service which never stops thinking about the interests of victims who suffer, frankly, when we don't succeed in tackling crime. The public consistently say that they want three things from the criminal justice system. They want the police to be there for them. They want action to be taken when crime is committed, including the antisocial behaviour which is too often ignored. And they want criminals to face the consequences for the crimes they commit. These are simple and reasonable expectations. I challenge anyone to tell me they're unrealistic, yet they haven't been met. We're determined to do better, not by ineffective authoritarianism, hollow, get-tough promises, higher spending, or more central control, but through sound policy and radical reform of policing, probation, and prisons, driving value for money, demanding greater accountability, giving the public information and power to effect change, and ensuring that the criminal justice system lives up to its name, truly serving the public which it is there to protect. Thank you.
Nick, that was great stuff. You have left us with absolutely no shortage of things to think about. I think we have a very short amount of time to take a couple of questions if you've got a moment. It'd be helpful if you put your hands up, just say who you are and where you're from, and I'll let Nick pick some questions from you.
Juliet.
Minister. Juliet Lamb, Prison Reform Trust. It may surprise people that we would very much welcome what you've said and match very much in terms of the evidence we've gathered over years, much of what you've said in terms of what's gone wrong. Where I'd like more clarification, please, is on the ways in which the concept of a big society and the ways in which other government departments are going to play their part in this radical reform, in particular Department of Health, actually, and so mental health care, treatment for addicts, and social care for people with learning disabilities, and also obviously education and early intervention you mentioned. I just see the reform necessarily stretching right across government and not being located purely in the criminal justice service.
I agree with that, Juliet. I mean, I think the reform that I'm talking about can't just apply, although I did single out at the end prisons, probation, policing. Actually, what we need is the engagement of many other public services as well, whether it's in relation to the early intervention, whether it's in relation to health services because of the importance of mental illness and how it affects offending, and the many other areas of reform that we intend to drive through. I mean, I mentioned schools reform and the empowerment of head teachers in relation to discipline. We do need a holistic response. I think what I was trying to say is that actually it's very important that we try and join this up at the national level, but really where the holistic response needs to be delivered is on the ground. And that is where I think there is enormous potential for new working. I must say that I was both motivated and encouraged by what I saw this morning of the Diamond Initiative, where police officers, probation officers, officers of local authority are working with the short-term sentence prisoners who are on release to get them on those pathways which are so important to prevent reoffending, to get them into housing, to get them into work. I talked to some of the offenders, and actually it has recast policing in a very different role. In my view, it's a historic role for policing, which is to prevent crime. But one police sergeant spoke interestingly about what he was doing, and he said, you know, he used in his previous role to leap out of a police van. They knew when short-term offenders were going to be released. They might have known where they were going to be lived. They knew what offences they'd committed. They were told that they were going to commit offences, and what they did was wait for them to commit the offences and then intervene. Now they're doing something quite different, working alongside the agencies to prevent that reoffending, and there is early evidence, it remains to be assessed properly, that it's reducing recidivism. So I am convinced that we can reduce reoffending. I think the international evidence is there that we can. And I'm convinced of the importance, as you say, of the partnership working. Ultimately, it must be delivered on the ground. Lawrence.
I was delighted with your comments on evidence and especially the reference to the National Health Service. Both Tory and Lib Dem documents prior to the election explored the idea of using a NICE kind of system, an evidence review and distillation with both practitioners and researchers. Is anything like that even on the table in the thinking as you're going forward with specifics?
Yes, Professor Sherman. So it's an interesting idea. I mean, one of the things I have discovered is that there is a body of evidence within the Ministry of Justice and the Home Office. There is an understanding of programs that work and so on, and there is a great deal of peer review and so on of programs out with government. There is a lot of international evidence about what works. Frankly, what we need is politicians to pay attention to it. But we also need the design of the criminal justice system that can accommodate it. And the force of what I'm trying to say in my speech today is that unless we are willing to embrace radical reform and to make sure that there are accountabilities and incentives, then it's no good simply bolting on programs even if we think that they might work. People have to be made responsible for reducing reoffending. The system has to have accountability within it. We are not going anymore to pursue this agenda, which is about one announcement after another, which involves central grip, the spending of public money, very tight central direction, and expect that that will yield results on a long-term basis. Sorry, I'm now flying blind. So,
Tim Roberts, Hayes of Stereo. Thank you for what you said. I work pretty much full time within the police, the large systems integrator, but I was with a large metropolitan force further north than this and a local authority yesterday. We were talking about the whole issue of integrated working on the ground. And to me, trying to guide my way through this and bring some value to it, what struck me more than anything else is firstly, complete lack of leadership. You have a culture within the police which is can-do, a culture with the other partners which is slightly different. But there seemed to be no governance, leadership and accountability wrapped around it to make this thing work. It's like you had a cake, you had all the ingredients, but you would never ever get to make the cake because there was no cook in charge. I feel is what we have to solve, and I think that's what you touched on today, but the ingredients are there, it's the leadership and the governance that are lacking.
Well, to take on your analogy, we need a chef for crime reduction. And that, of course, raises the question of the potential role of the directly elected individuals who we are proposing should replace police authorities. One of the things I think we are going to have to look at, and I signalled that in the speech, is the complexity of some of the various different partnerships that we have on the ground. At their best, these partnerships, where there is a chef, can really deliver. And so at their worst, they are bureaucratic, nobody accepts responsibility, it's not clear who's in the lead. We need to bring that clarity. And I think if we do, then we can drive the effective working of the kind I've seen this morning and actually deliver real results.
John Plummer, Young Offenders Academy with the Foyer Federation. Thank you very much for that. We too could welcome a great deal of what you said. You didn't make any specific reference to the devolution of youth custody budgets and responsibility to local authorities. And this is one of the disincentives to working to reduce youth crime and youth offending and indeed the number of young people in custody. I'd be grateful if you could comment on that, because I think that it's going to be one of the ways of engaging local government and others more. And if you might also comment on the issue of what we believe to be the seriously understated costs of youth custody at the moment, which until that is clarified is going to inhibit negotiations about devolution. Thank you.
Well, John, you're right, I didn't, partly because we are appraising youth justice at the moment to inform what we will then propose in relation to sentencing and offender management and the youth justice system in the autumn when we set out the proposals, and I didn't want to prejudge them. I think there are powerful localist arguments in relation to the criminal justice system. And as to your other part of the question, of course, one of the things we must have, and I mentioned this in relation to the crime figures, is kind of accurate information. We can't make judgments about success unless we have accurate information. I think there is a problem in the criminal justice system about identifying costs and real costs. And we are going to need to do this, both as part of the comprehensive spending review process, but also because, as I mentioned, one of our ambitions is to take forward the possibility of payment by results mechanisms. We need to be clear about costs and what costs we might be able to capture in terms of things like reduction of reoffending if we're going to make those schemes a success. But they are very exciting. The potential for this is very exciting because it does unlock the possibility of a greater focus on rehabilitation than we have had for a very long time. The lady in the back. I'm surprised you all haven't left by now.
Well, because I'm going to start speaking.
Yeah. No.
Tactful Nick. Ronnie King, I'm a trustee of London Action Trust, which breaks the cycle of reoffending, but I'm also the CEO through Unity, which are families who've been bereaved through usually guns, gangs, knives, and alcohol-fueled violence. So I had to stop myself cheering through your speech. The things you're saying reflect everything that we've been asking for, and the idea that it's not a criminal justice system, but a service which serves victims and victims' families. I know what I'm speaking about is that we want to have a voice in the sentencing, we want to have a voice in the probation, the service there, and also some way of reforming legal aid, where some of the perpetrators will force these families back into appeal after appeal, costing this government, well, the country, the taxpayer, millions and millions. Somehow you've got to stop the legal system getting fat on hopeless cases. And I do know in America, before you sentence, you do get the past history. And I wouldn't like to be sitting in the Old Bailey, as I have done in a murder trial, and then find out that my version of what I saw in front of me was completely the wrong one, when I saw the young person in front of me had a record a mile long. Now that is not justice, and maybe if we come closer to bringing the victims through their families alive to have a voice, you will do such a huge service, and I will cheer you to the rafters. So we'd like to come and see you, and we would like to be a part of this reform. And I'm sure Baroness Helen Newlove, who's part of us sitting here, will hold you to account to that as well. So thank you.
Well, I would be absolutely delighted to meet you and talk about these issues, as I would be delighted to talk again to Helen. I mean, this is a government that will be completely understanding of the need to ensure that victims have a voice. It's exactly what I was saying in my speech. I sometimes think that the world is divided into two. It is those who don't understand the importance of that, or can even be contemptuous of it, and so on, and those who understand that part of making this system responsive is ensuring that victims have a voice. And too often they simply do not. And we must find the right ways to ensure that we have, exactly as I said and as you echoed, a service that appreciates what victims have to go through and builds justice around them.
Hello, I'm Tanya English from St Mungo's. Many of you will know that homeless people and West Lucas have long and extensive history of the criminal justice system. And there was much in your speech that we would really very much welcome. Your understanding around mental health issues, that they're underlying reason for why people take drugs, and that the housing actually is part of the reform system that's needed. And we're working, in case people wondered, we actually work directly in 7 London prisons, so our experience isn't just actually from the housing perspective. I was wondering whether or not, in your desire for people to be seen to be punished, whether or not we should be tearing up the paperwork that we've been doing and the thinking we've been doing about alternatives to custody. We believe they're going to be effective and cost-effective, and that locking people up, especially in the short-term prison environment, isn't always the answer.
I sometimes think that the mistake is to use the word alternatives. I was taking a slightly different perspective, which is I think what we need to do is stop the slide into custody. And we know that in relation to short-term prison sentences, the big component of those offenders who've got into short-term sentences have committed really quite a large number of crimes. The offenders that I was hearing about today, who were involved in the Diamond Initiative to try and prevent them reoffending, the average number of offences they had committed was 23. And the problem that we have at the moment is that magistrates run out of road with these offenders, and there is often little choice but for them to give a custodial sentence. And that is why I focused for a part of my speech on the importance of looking at the non-custodial part that should run before custody, and the effectiveness and rigour of those disposals. If they can be rigorous, if the public have confidence that they are rigorous, then we can stop the slide into custody. That, I think, is the right approach. And then at the other end, I think we need to be focusing very much on the support and supervision of offenders who leave from short-term prison sentences. But if there are the community orders that are not completed, if there are drugs rehabilitation programs that are not completed, if there is community payback that is frankly not rigorous and not completed, and it's not visible, this not only undermines public confidence, it almost certainly means that the offenders are not having the kinds of interventions that are going to prevent them from reoffending again. And I think we need much more rigour in that space, and indeed in the earlier space, to stop them getting into the criminal justice system at all. So I think we have a clear-sighted understanding of the problem of the revolving door. The question is, what is the right approach to deal with that? But all of these issues will form part of the proposals that we'll set out in the autumn in relation to sentencing and offender management. Sorry, I'm not John.
John Collins from the Criminal Justice Alliance.
Prisons with a Purpose, which you mentioned earlier, made a very specific commitment to end prison overcrowding, which I think is damaging to a lot of the rehabilitative work you were talking about. Is that still a commitment for the new government, or ambition for the new government? And if so, do you think it can be achieved without the sort of prison building programme, which we can't afford anyway, and even if we could, would be a very poor use of public money?
Well, I think, John, Prisons with a Purpose was written 3 years ago in a very different fiscal climate, and I think it was important to understand what those policy proposals were about in terms of creating additional headroom to ensure that prisons had the flexibility to be able to manage offenders. Part of the problem at the moment is we have a system which is under stress and so on. And one of the issues that I was discussing this morning was that you have teams that are attempting to manage offenders who have been released from short-term prison sentences. One of the things they want to do is get into the prisons before release so that they can start to address issues that the offender is going to have, whether it's in relation to literacy, whether it's in relation to where they're going to live, and so on. That is fine if those offenders are located in London even, but a lot of them aren't located anywhere near London because of overcrowding in the system. So of course there are powerful arguments to want to create the space that we can have a system that can operate properly and where rehabilitation has the space to take place. Those arguments remain just as powerful. But equally, of course, we have the massive fiscal constraints that were announced by the Chancellor, and the action that has to be taken that was announced by the Chancellor yesterday. So we have to be realistic as well.
Thank you. Martin Houghton-Brown, Chief Executive of the charity Missing People. You talked about the need for information and data to inform decision making, and for example, we don't know accurately how many children are missing in the UK today. A multiplicity of software systems at the local level, 4 or 5 national policing agencies involved in the missing issue. To what extent a fanfare for you.
Bit of response.
Yes, to what extent do you see the reform of national policing bodies and the reform of police technology as intrinsic to delivering the reforms you've talked about today?
The whole issue of missing people and so on is one that I'm very happy to talk about, or whichever of my colleagues is the appropriate lead on that to talk about. It might be James Brokenshire, I think, in our team, so I don't want to cut across it, but I'm happy to try and make that happen, if it hasn't already. There is an important discussion about what is national in policing and what is local. We propose a radical reform to enhance the local accountability of policing. We also propose some national reform in relation to the creation of a border police force. There is also a driving value for money imperative and the need to ensure that we are able to tackle crimes which cross force borders. And so what that means is we do have to assess what is the right shape, not just of local police forces in terms of accountability, but of the national policing space. And we will be saying more about that in due course. I'm sorry we can't preempt final consideration.
Thank you, Nick. I agree with a lot of this in here. Thank you very much indeed. Speaking as a representative of Families United, which is a group of families who all lost a child to murder, including my son 2 years ago. Just like to add one thing to the three things you said that people want for the criminal justice system is a fourth, and this is to prevent this happening in the first place. I'm very concerned, and I'm not apportioning blame or anything. I do not feel it helps anybody to apportion blame, but all the other families within Families United, the perpetrators, have developed into the thugs they become, the thugs and murderers they become, and it starts from a very, very young age. And I think just a few thoughts there on this early intervention. And I think, again, Duncan Smith was I think we're talking 3, 4, 5 years of age. But I feel just a couple of words there from my place.
Yes, that again is a part of the space which involves the criminal justice system, but also involves other agencies that we must give the closest attention to, because it's at the beginning of the chain that I described. And frankly, if we get to the point where we have allowed young people to get into the criminal justice system, we know that the famous conveyor belt from that moment onwards accelerates and so on. So we must be trying, I think, much harder through effective early intervention to prevent that entry. There are lots of agencies that are going to come to bear. And this goes firstly to what the Prime Minister's been talking about for a long time, about the importance of family and strong family. It goes to our school reforms in terms of discipline. It then goes in terms of enforcement, to assessing the tools that are available in relation to antisocial behaviour, whether we are giving the right kinds of local interventions and power in the hands of the right kinds of people to do it. I am assessing all of that. We want to make sure that the agencies have the tools to do the job and that they are both motivated to work together and make those effective interventions when they're going to have to do so, when resources are tight. So it goes to the earlier question about youth justice as well. But we are going to have to be, I think, be very clear-sighted about value for money in these programs and making sure that the interventions really are rigorous and are delivering. That's what I'm looking at the moment. Sorry, one more, Judith.
Judith Howe from the RSPB. You've spoken, and quite rightly so, about the need for value for money from the various services delivered by the police, and also the need for effectiveness. The RSPB has one particular and very great interest in the police service, which is Wildlife Crime Unit, National Wildlife Crime Unit. It is extremely specialised. It's spread across the country, but it equally has a very, very close link into the local services and the local communities. And we're very concerned that in these straitened circumstances, it might be for the chop. And we would really welcome some level of assurance that it has a future beyond May 2011.
Well, now Judith, now I understand why the RSPB was coming along to speak to you. I saw your name on the list, was absolutely intrigued, as I thought perhaps you were in the wrong lecture, but you weren't. I talked earlier this week informally to Richard Crompton, who's the Chief Constable of Lincolnshire, about the Wildlife Crime Unit. I am very familiar with its work, having talked about it, been briefed by the unit before the general election. Wildlife crime is something that the coalition government understands the importance of. If you look in the coalition agreement, for instance, in relation to international wildlife crime, we talk specifically about ensuring that it is one of the things that we're dealing with at our borders and so on. So we understand the importance of all of this. And I certainly don't want to upset 3.5 million RSPB members. Equally, I'm quite keen, after just a month in office, not to upset the Prime Minister either. So I'm not going to make off-the-cuff spending commitments. I hope you'll understand that. But of course, we understand the importance and the value of that unit.
Good. I'm afraid I think we'll probably
do one more.
You don't do one.
This is one at the back. might regret this depending on what the question is.
Hi, David Green from Civitas. Just a quick question on directly elected commissioners. One of the big worries surely must be that totally unsuitable people get elected because of a very low turnout and a very low level of interest. I know that's not assuming that, but remember how Labour had great plans for regional assemblies, and you had a little bit to do with the referendum, I think, that led people to reject the idea. So would you be willing to contemplate having a referendum in each area to ask people if they really do want directly elected police commissioners?
Yeah, no, I do regret doing Look, the Liberal Democrats in their manifesto pledged directly elected police authorities. We pledged the replacement of police authorities with a directly elected individual subject to strict checks and balances. We have a dual mandate to reform police authorities, and that is in the coalition agreement, and that is what we are going to propose to the House of Commons. And I believe that we should trust people in terms of the individuals that will be elected. People mind about law and order. People will see that these are big and important jobs, and I believe that people will vote accordingly. And I think it's important to understand both the power of greater accountability and what that will mean for communities in rebuilding the bridge between the police and the public. But it's also very important to understand the exchange here. Policing has become increasingly centralised and directed under the previous government. And what I am proposing is a rebalancing of the tripartite arrangement and a recognition that actually police forces sprang out of their communities, and it is right that the connection between communities and policing should be strengthened, and so on. So I believe that this will be a really important reform in terms of what we want to deliver for the public, and to match the public's ambitions and the public's expectations with what is being delivered by government, and so on. So I'm excited by this reform. We are determined to continue with it, and we're in very constructive dialogue with the various stakeholders about how we can make it work. So be positive, David.
Well, Nick, it was a huge pleasure to listen to such a thoughtful speech, to hear your answers to diverse, all kinds of different questions. It seems to me you have a very compelling understanding of the reasons for sustained underperformance, a good understanding of the causes of low morale, a brilliant vision to make all the players work much more closely together. So it seems to me you have the criminal justice system all under control, and only remains to wonder whether you would not be a rather better England manager than the one that we have at the moment. And it only also remains for us to thank Nick in the conventional way.